So on Thursday, we will do the final examination. This is an opportunity for you to question and challenge my understanding of the world. And so today, what I'm going to do is review all that we've learned this semester and combine together into a framework of how the world works. Okay? So the main driving question of the semester is, why did the US attack Iran? Right? So this is the central mystery of the world today. Because even today, Donald Trump has yet to articulate a reason for attacking Iran. And I do understand that right now there are ceasefire negotiations going on, but unless we can properly understand or diagnose the rationale for this war, it's very hard for us to appreciate the difficulty of coming to a ceasefire, okay? So I'm going to present to you the three major reasons that we learned in this class as to why the United States attacked Iran. Okay? The first major explanation is it's geopolitics. And so according to this theory, what the United States is most afraid of is that Russia, Iran, and China would come together into a grand alliance. Okay, so you have Russia here, you have China here, and you have Iran here. Okay? Now, why the United States is afraid of this grand alliance is that if these three nations were to combine together and just trade amongst themselves, they could encompass the entire Eurasian continent, which would include Europe, the entirety of the Middle East, the GCC, Africa, India. And they could negate the American maritime power and just trade amongst themselves using railways constructed by China. All right? And there's nothing America could do about it. And this is a huge problem because right now the Americans have $39 trillion in debt. And so the only way to finance this debt is to force others to continue to buy US treasuries. Okay? So the reason why the United States attacked Iran is to force everyone to buy US treasuries. Why? Well, because if you attack Iran, you knock off at least 20% of the world's energy. And as a result, the world, Europe, China, and Japan specifically, are forced to buy more US treasuries. And then, by knocking out Iran, you can then start to control the world's major choke points, including the Strait of Hormuz, the Strait of Gibraltar. This is Strait of Malacca, actually. This is the Strait of Gibraltar. This is the Cape of Good Hope. And so as a result, you control the world's trade. So if the world wants resources, they can only do so from buying from the Western Hemisphere that America controls, okay? So attacking Iran is crucial to achieving this geopolitical vision of America in order to maintain the American empire. Okay, so that's the first major reason. Okay, there's also another explanation, which is different, very different, and this is eschatological. Number two is eschatological. And what this means is that there are religious fanatics within the American empire who believe that a war in the Middle East will launch a chain of events that will ultimately culminate in the return of Jesus. Okay, so these are people who believe very strongly in the Bible, and they believe that what the Bible teaches them is that if there is a war in the Middle East, okay, this Iran war, this will lead to the third temple, which would also involve the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in the Islamic world, which would lead to the war of Gog and Magog, which would lead to the rise of the Antichrist. And at this point, if you are Jewish, you believe that this will lead to the coming of the Messiah and the ushering in of the Messianic age. If you're a Christian, you believe that this will lead to the second coming of Jesus and the rapture and the millennium of peace in the world before the day of judgment, and then heaven comes to earth. Okay? Now, what's interesting about this eschatological vision is that it also aligns with both the Islamic eschatology as well as the Orthodox eschatology. Okay? This is important because the Islamic, of course, is Iran, and the Orthodox is Russian. And so what's really strange is that the four major nations involved right now in this war in the Middle East, including Iran, Russia, the United States, and Israel, share a similar eschatological outlook. And as a result, they're all actually, in many ways, working together to achieve a certain geopolitical outcome, which includes the building of the third temple, the war of Gog and Magog, the coming of the Antichrist, and ultimately the end of the world. Okay? So that's the second explanation for what's happening. The third reason is actually the most mundane. Okay? And the third reason is just imperial decline. And when an empire declines, it does all sorts of stupid things because internally it is fracturing for three reasons. The first reason is financialization, which is to say that you have a few people who control all the capital, and as a result, all they do is force everyone into debt slavery. And then everyone's forced to engage in speculation in order to try to get rich, because there's no honest way to make a living. All right? So capital controls the empire, and this leads to corruption, inequality, and debt, and ultimately slavery. Second problem is demographic crisis. And this is true for all empires in decline in that young people refuse to have children. But not only that, but old people live longer and longer. So you have this huge problem where old people live longer and longer, they have pensions, they require young people to work, but young people don't want to have babies. Okay? So just naturally, over time, the empire is going to collapse. So the way for the empire to resolve this issue is through immigration. So they welcome millions and millions of outsiders in order to do the jobs no one actually wants to do. And this leads to ethnic tension within the empire, okay? The third reason, the third symptom of imperial decline is something called elite overproduction, which is a phrase coined by a historian named Peter Turchin. And he argues that if you look at all societies in decline, it's driven by the fact that you have certain elites who want to control policy, who want power. But power by definition is a zero-sum game. And so these elites compete for the limited positions of power. And this leads to civil war. And one manifestation of the civil war is that this war is projected outwards. Okay? That's why an empire does stupid things like go invade Venezuela for no reason, goes attacks Iran for no reason. Right now, America is talking about taking over Greenland, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Cuba, okay? So this is the other explanation for why things are happening the way they are, because the empire's decline, all these internal conflicts that are destroying the empire from within are projected outwards. And so this turmoil is projected onto Iran, okay? So these are the three major reasons. Now what's interesting about these three major reasons is that they're actually not in competition with each other. In fact, they support each other. And honestly, they lead to the same outcomes. If you believe in the eschatological model, okay, you believe that this is the end of days, you believe that the Israelis will build the third temple, you believe that this war in the Middle East will just expand outwards before it encompasses the entire world, something called the War of Gog and Magog. You believe that a charismatic leader will rise to unify much of the world. And if you just analyze the geopolitical framework, you can actually come to the same conclusions. If you look at the imperial decline framework, you can also come to the same conclusions. Okay, this is really, really strange in that you have these three divergent explanations for what's going on, but in many ways, they're very, very similar. In fact, they lead to the same conclusions. So what I want to discuss today is, why is this the case? Why is it that eschatology and geopolitics and imperial decline all end up giving the same understanding of the world and forces us to make certain predictions about the world? Okay? So, my explanation to you is this. Eschatology is really just an understanding of geopolitics framed allegorically. Okay? So when we're saying this is that what eschatology really is, it's not religion. What it is it takes thousands of years of human history, tens of thousands of years of human history, and condenses it into stories that then can be told to children and passed on through generations and generations. Okay? So it is impossible for humans to pass on complex history over thousands of years. But it is easy to take this history, frame it into stories, and then tell it to your children who remember it, and then these children will then pass it on to their children. And then this is how we develop eschatology. Okay? So then the question then is, how did we develop this particular framework of eschatology, where a war in the Middle East will lead to the third temple, the return of the Jews to Israel, the war of Gog and Magog, and the coming of the Antichrist before the coming of the Messiah? Where does the story come from? And what I will show you now is that this is actually a persistent story in the Middle East. The first thing that I need you guys to appreciate is the Middle East, especially the Levant, is the most important part of the world. Why? Because historically, it's been the wealthiest part of the world. All right, so let's look at the Levant. This is the Levant, okay, which includes present-day Israel, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon. What's below the Levant? Egypt. What's above the Levant? Anatolia. Then if you go further east, what do you get? You get Mesopotamia, okay? If you keep on going east, what do you get? You get Persia. Okay? And then if you keep on going east, you get India. Okay? And historically, this part of the world was the center of the universe. The wealthiest, the most advanced, the most geopolitically important. And the hinge, the pivot, is the Levant. Okay? Now, historically, Egypt and Mesopotamia were the wealthiest parts of the world. By the way, Mesopotamia includes Babylon and Assyria. Okay? All right? So everyone wants to conquer Egypt, but the way to conquer Egypt is through the Levant. So whoever controls the Levant has a huge advantage over everyone else. Okay? Now, because of a historical accident called the Bronze Age collapse, the Israelites came into being. Okay? Israel. And Israel is a crossroads of empire. And again, this was a historical accident. You had the Bronze Age collapse, so